It just cannot be overstated that the world has sped up. We used to have, as a society, about a generation to catch up to big changes that were happening in the culture. And today, that number is down to about 7 years. And the difficulty is our brains can't go that fast. So we now live in a world where change is moving faster than we actually can digest. And that's the air we breathe. That's the water we swim in.
Welcome to the 1110 Leadership Podcast, where we tackle issues at the intersection of leadership, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Rob Shields, Vice President of Strategy at 1110 Leadership, and I'm joined by my co-host, founder and CEO of 1110 Leadership, David Spickard. Proverbs 1110 lays out a bold and countercultural vision. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. We're here to ask, what does it look like practically to be this type of leader? Leaders willing to invest everything they have so that everyone around them can thrive. Join us on the journey as we lean in, listen, and learn how to become Proverbs 11:10 kind of leaders. The kind of leaders that make our cities rejoice. Hey, David.
Hey, Rob.
How are we doing today?
We're good.
Yeah? Man, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling really good about our conversation with our guest today. This one was powerful. Whoa.
Yeah, I enjoyed this, not just from a perspective of our listeners, but just for me, in my own leadership, in my own place in life. It was just extremely encouraging.
For our listeners, just to frame up the journey you're about to go on, get ready, buckle up. You are in for an amazing ride here. We have Dr. Michaela O'Donnell as our guest today. She's going to be talking about the book that she recently co-authored called Life in Flux. Michaela is the executive director at the Max Dupree Center for Leadership, a center dedicated to helping leaders work and live in distinctly Christian ways. And she has written multiple books. She's also the author of Make Work Matter. But today is a conversation all about Flux. And David, we really enjoyed this conversation. Michaela is an incredible storyteller. And I think that was probably what risen to the surface for me is just, man, what an amazing way of making some of these ideas about what does it mean to lead through change really sticky.
Yeah, and through her story, she's revealing the incredible work that she and the others at Dupree Leadership Center do to understand really what leaders go through and how they navigate, in this case, uncertainty and flux. And what does it look like to embrace that for themselves and then enable their teams to move forward through that uncertainty. And so we live in a world that has tremendous uncertainty. And particularly in the last 5 years, we all can attest to that. So it's made leadership that much more difficult. And so our conversation with Michaela gives us a really good perspective on how to engage with that.
Yeah, I think it complements so many of the conversations we've had here at 1110 podcast, but this idea of naming the waters around us, which I think is a metaphor she'll come back to time and time again. But I think it really helps to bring a different conversation and a really thoughtful perspective to the waters that leaders are expected to swim in these days and how they can best navigate them, especially in times of change. So without further ado, here's our conversation. Michaela, welcome to the 1110 Leadership Podcast. I'm sorry. This is one of those funny blurbs that is going to probably make it into the audio and the final cut. Because
I hope it does.
I just say David's name, and that's our routine. And then he knows that I really give him very little to work with. Yeah.
Try again. Do it again.
Let's do a redo. Some of my favorite podcasts do.
Let's keep it all. But yeah, that's
we're keeping it all. This
is
staying
just my name.
That's right. All right. Ready? Here we go. Michaela.
Rob, David, good to see you.
Hey,
wow, that felt
Michaela,
so great.
Rob, you losing your voice?
A little bit. I just felt like I went back to like teenage years. It went really high. I don't know why.
Safe space.
Yeah. Maybe when I get off kilter, it just goes up an octave. Oh, wow. If our listeners can't tell, we are really looking forward to this conversation with Michaela. And man, it's such a joy to have you on our podcast, and really looking forward to hearing more about your journey today.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Michaela, it's fun to have this conversation because We could talk about a lot of different things with where you're coming from when it comes to leadership. And yet we're going to focus on your book that most recently came out, Life in Flux, and how you talk about what it looks like to lead through periods of uncertainty and how we navigate that. And so for me, this is great because two reasons. One is we deal with many leaders, work with many leaders who are just in that place of trying to lead in the gray, right? Where future is uncertain. There might be some things that have happened that have turned things upside down a bit. They might feel a little bit underwater and figuring out how to lead in that season. But then for me personally, I just feel like I'm in a season of that where I've got a place where our kids are now grown and we're in an empty nest stage, and you think about the second half of your life and what the future holds. And a lot of people who get in my stage of life are thinking about how do we finish well. So great to have you. I'm excited as we get into this conversation just to give our listeners an understanding of what your story is, the backstory to the book, and what really motivated you to take on this topic specifically.
Yeah, thanks for that framing, David. And there's like a joke that's if you want to, like, don't write a book about something that you don't want to be in the middle of, because there's this you just end up living the experience all over again. So the last couple of years of my life have been in an enormous amount of flux. And my husband and I and two kids moved from California to the Midwest, and there was just layers and layers of that, including the very deep question of what does it mean to return home after 20 years away, and to a place I said I would never come back to, a place I ran away from. So you can just imagine the flux that I have been in, but that flux is not what birthed the book. It started after grad school. My husband and we met and started a business together. Actually, we did websites and film production and branding. It's called Long Winter Media. My husband still actually runs that. About 6 years ago, I transitioned to work at the Max Dupree Center for Leadership, first as the senior director and then as the executive director. And my husband 6 years ago was one of those flux points. What are we going to do? Are we going to change the business? Are we going to shut it down? I've been client acquisition. What's it going to be like to not have me in the business? So just all kinds of those things. But even before that moment, we just had a bunch of questions around what are we supposed to be when we grow up? Hey, we have been on these paths for a while, and somehow things are just not as clear as we thought they were going to be. And there was just a ton of working out there. I ended up doing my PhD research on some of those questions. Again, I'm just like working it out for my own life. And after I did some PhD research on what does it mean to find your way in a changing world of work, that ended up giving birth to a ton of work that we do at the Dupree Center. One of the flagship programs that we've done at the Dupree Center over the last 5 years has been a cohort for people who are in vocational transition. We've done, oh goodness, I'm going to probably get the numbers wrong as of today, but over the last 4 or 5 years, we've done something like 90 cohorts in total and 60 of just the vocational transition cohorts.
Wow.
And yeah, wow is right. So then I just like, oh my goodness, all new questions, all new learning. Like, why is this such a hot spot for people? And what all kinds of flux started to come to the surface. And so I knew I was going to write a book on this topic. And I just started calling my friends, people who had different vantage points than me, people who had been around the block a time or two more than I had. And I'm like, okay, we're seeing this. What are you seeing? We're seeing this. What are you seeing? And one of those thought partners was a woman named Lisa Slayton, who she was at Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation for a long time, and then just works with leaders who are in vocational crisis all the time. And the more we talked, Lisa was like, I'd like to write that book with you. And I was like, wait, do I want to write a book with somebody? That sounds hard. I don't know. I'm already signed up. What's the publisher going to think? All this stuff. And it started a deeply formative collaborative relationship that I felt like in its own way embodied many of the things that we put forth in the book. In some ways, David, the flux conversation has just been with me a long time now. And it feels this book is an attempt to work some of that out. And then again, I find myself right back in the middle of it, speaking to myself.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think you could hit this from a couple different angles, Michaela, but your role specifically with the Dupree Center, it puts you almost trying to borrow like a football analogy of it kind of puts you up in the booth of just having a really unique
Yes.
vantage point of the field, if you will. And that's why I'm really excited for this conversation because you're talking about Flux. David and I, we've had different episodes where we may come up against that, but it's more informed maybe from our work, more so coaching on the ground. Like we've got the
Yes.
headset, we're talking to the players as they come in off the field here in Raleigh. And here you are, a wide reach of ministry influence. And I think that comes with maybe a really unique vantage point. And so I'd love to just ask specific to this concept of flux, but also just in general, what are those trends that you're seeing emerge in leadership today, specifically around maybe how leaders are adapting to flux? Because I imagine that I imagine you have some things that are rising to the surface.
Yeah, first of all, I love that analogy. That's actually helpful for me. I'm gonna take that with me. So it's a gift,
You
Rob.
got it. You got it.
And one time I got to sit, and just one time, let's be very clear, I got to sit as a guest in the fancy seats where you do get to overlook and my team is the Cornhuskers. I'm from Nebraska. So I got to look over the stadium, and it really is a different vantage point. And in some ways, that's been a learning curve for me. I love to be right in there with leaders. I love to have the headset on. I love to call the plays. In certain moments, I love to be on the field. But you're right. There's been this being able to take a macro look at it. I would say our data points are three. One, we do some of our own research at the Dupree Center and our own original research where we're doing qualitative inquiries into some of the places we feel like we just need some more information there. So that's a whole stream of data. The second is organizations just like yours. It's been like one of the great privileges of the last 3 years of being the executive director to get to meet a bunch of people who are wearing the headsets and to be like, what do you need? What's going on? How can we support you? And then the other thing is both through the cohorts and even just in speaking with leaders who run organizations like yours and others, we get enough interaction of the field dynamics. So those three different vantage points really inform what we're seeing and what I'm seeing. It just cannot be overstated that the world has sped up. It has just gotten so much faster, and there's all kinds of really good packaging and theories. And if a listener is interested, go look up Moore's law. It's this whole thing, this whole description and explanation of exactly how the world has sped up and why it feels different. But the brass taxes is we used to have as a society about a generation to catch up to big changes that were happening in the culture. And today that number is down to about 7 years. And the difficulty is our brains can't go that fast. So we now live in a world where change is moving faster than we actually can digest. And that's the air we breathe. That's the water we swim in. Additionally, there's good data by a man named Bruce Feiler that says individuals undergo pretty meaningful transitions every 12 to 18 months in our own lives. David opened up with saying, I've got some of this stuff going on in my own life. I told you I've been moving the last 2 years. Like just it actually goes back to back. And so the first thing that sometimes happens when I tell people that is they're like, oh, thank God, I'm not crazy. Wait a minute, that's what everybody else is going through. I'm like, yeah, that's the thing that you're feeling is what everybody else is going through. That's one of the big observations is that we're all feeling the increased pace and we're not necessarily saying it out loud to each other, which makes us feel isolated. And we know that leaders already feel isolated for a bunch of reasons. And this is one more thing that would go stack onto that isolation. So that's one. The second piece, that the thing that I'm seeing in the leadership ecosystem and the leaders that we're paying attention to are people who would self-identify as Christians. So I want to name that. So this isn't necessarily like taking a wider look, is that there is this real correlation of the work feeling too hard, too complex, too ambiguous, and yet it is the work. And so there's this response that's happening. And I'm going to make it sound like it's dualistic right now. It's not this dualistic, but just for the sake of conversation, Some people are like burning out, and it's just a lot of, I cannot with that anymore, and I feel alone, and this is not what I signed up for, and I care about other people, and I'm finding myself with daunting decisions, and that. But the other way people are going with it is, gosh, I really need to grow. I need to evolve. I need to change. And we're seeing this whole movement of leaders saying, okay, what happens inside me matters for what I'm able to do on the outside. And
Hmm.
I don't know that I've done all that work or I know how to do all that work, but I think that's the next frontier of my own leadership. So that's number two. So one, change is happening super, super fast, and we're needing to normalize it to each other. Two, what happens on the inside is a really big deal. And then the third thing I would say is that, and I think that your guys' work, you're right in the middle of this, is that people are really, really interested in systemic change. And that can mean and take on a bunch of different flavors depending on where they find themselves, what their value system is. You guys think a lot about justice. What does it mean to be just? I'm like, how ripe of a question was that 20 years ago in corporate America? So we're seeing those systemic change values come to the surface, I think, in ways that are unique. So that's a lot, but those are three things I'm noticing.
Okay, that is fascinating.
Yes. Yes.
I'm swimming over here in those three big ideas. I think you're normalizing some things that leaders are experiencing, but they haven't been able to put words to it, particularly the speed idea. And I'm thinking here, our company is 7 years in, right? So we're at that 7-year mark of a big change that you mentioned, this 7 years, or then it's every 12 to 18 months we're going through personal change. I'm curious as to how we think about this as leaders, maybe both personally and organizationally, when we're faced with change and this flux. When do we stay the course and when do we innovate? Like,
Yeah.
when do we know the difference between the two? And I'm thinking about a company we work with right after COVID that really needed to think through how to respond to the crisis. And most of the companies in their industry were batting down the hatches and staying the course. And they instead decided we need to innovate. We needed to, in this place of uncertainty, we need to take some chances.
Mm.
And it turned out for them to be extraordinarily beneficial over the long haul. And they stayed ahead of their competition at the time. That was that example. But of course, I'm sure it's not binary, whether you stay the course or whether you innovate. I'm curious how you would help us as leaders think through that, both personally in our own development, how we think about our leadership, and then also how we carry that out within our organization.
David, I love this question. I think it's a question that we should be asking each other all the time, actually. So I'll name that my own bias. I'm the daughter of entrepreneurs. I started a business. For people who think about things like personality tests, I'm always like a strategic. I'm an ideator. I'm an Enneagram 7. So I'm very biased toward creativity, and just name that on the forefront. But one thing I have learned over time in listening to leaders, in my own leadership, is that it can be really taxing on the people in an organization to be innovating all the time, really taxing. And here's the thing, on the flip side, it can be very taxing on an organization to not be innovating. And so, what do you do with that? If it's taxing on the people to be innovating, but taxing on the organization to not be innovating, that's the space of leadership, right? That is the space of leadership. How do you hold Ronald Heifetz, who maybe you guys are familiar with Heifetz's language. If not, he's fantastic. Leadership on the Line. He's out of Harvard Business School, and he talks a lot about a holding environment, and a holding environment being the psychological space that leaders create in times of change, both in response to stuff that's coming and also in pursuit of what we hope might be. And he has this really beautiful analogy in it. And it's the analogy of a thermometer versus a thermostat. And thermometer goes and reads the room, right? You got to be great. You got to need people who can read the room and who can tell you, hey, it's too hot in here. Everybody's sweating, or it's freezing. Can we please turn on the heater? Leadership. And I don't mean an individual, but a leadership team, the structure, sometimes an individual person. The job in these moments is really to be the thermostat, is to set the temperature. And the sweet spot in these seasons of change is to set it at a place, and this means something different in lots of different contexts, that it's hot enough that people have to wrestle with their deeply held assumptions, right? That there's some pinch point in motivation to actually change, but also safe enough, cool enough that they won't just opt out, and that they actually feel like they can do that work. And that's the work. People will talk about it as forming adaptive capacities. I think forming adaptive capacities is the same thing that leads to lasting innovation. The clients that you're talking about, that was a big decision. That was a lot of stuff that went into that in the middle of a huge crisis on a global level. It wasn't like, let's go experiment and see what's fun over here. It was like, this is something that's needed. And I can only imagine the reflective questions and the collaborative decisions and the thermometer reading and then the thermostat stuff that had to go into that moment. And then I'll end with one very practical thing. Years ago, I was with a client and she won a Google small business grant, and she got to take a couple people with her to Google, and we did all this like training. And she took me as person who was doing all this communication stuff with her to Google. And like literally all over the walls at Google was their 80-20 philosophy. And it was new to me at that time. I didn't know what that was, but it basically said to Google employees, we expect 80% of your time to be on the things that are on your to-do list. And we want and expect 20% of your time to be on just the ideas that could lead to the next innovation. And I asked somebody that worked there, I was like, what's come out of this 20%? They're like, have you ever heard of Gmail? I was like, yes, I've heard of Gmail. Like Gmail came out of the 20%. And
Wow.
so that's a tech industry. And that was their way of normalizing the creativity along the way. And so contextualizing our different contexts, I think at the very time that we're doing that larger work, we have to normalize some space for play that leads to the muscles to encounter these big moments.
Hey, business leaders, are you and your team truly thriving? The Thrive Assessment from 1110 Leadership is designed to help you find out. This powerful 360 tool uncovers key leadership opportunities and challenges to help foster growth and help you build a thriving workplace culture. With insights into trust, health, relationships, impact, value, and engagement, you'll gain a clear understanding of where you stand and how to improve. But what sets the Thrive Assessment apart is the relational process. It's so much more than just an online survey. Our team walks with you through the results, providing support and coaching to help you and your team thrive together. Ready to take your leadership to the next level? Visit 1110leadership.com to learn more and start thriving today. Yeah, Michaela, I love that you're taking the conversation to this place, because what you're naming is the reality that leadership implies you're working with people. And it is as simple and as complicated as working with other humans, which you mentioned this idea of it has to be reading the room and what amount of change can people handle. But I also have to come from doing that work myself. And I can't just make it about other people if it's not being done inwardly. You use this term in your book, vocational wayfinding, how leaders can find direction amidst uncertainty. I love that term. I'd love for you to talk more about that. I actually, this is hitting me in a great moment. I just bought my 8-year-old daughter her first compass. So she's in the back of the car telling me which way we're going when we're turning at all times right now, which is, I love it because we have some woods in our backyard. I just want, don't get lost. And so I think this term hits me with that illustration as we're talking. But I'd love to ground this conversation in a way that you do in your book, because when you think about that in terms of having a compass, right? We do have a path that we can follow We're not alone in having to discern these things, or we shouldn't attempt to. But what are some practical ways that leaders can maybe encourage this same sense of kind of vocational wayfinding and trying to claim this idea of finding that purpose, leaning into adaptability? It's one thing to do it for yourself, but it's another thing to create a culture where people are really leaning in with you. And that is the definition and the rub when it comes to leadership, right? It's not enough to just figure out a path for yourself. You're actually trying to carve a path that other people will follow and be move towards their own wholeness, which is not a prescriptive journey. So I'd love for you to speak more about that from your perspective.
Yeah, and I would just add on, you're trying to give them the tools or help them find the tools to carve the paths that you're going to follow too, because we've got all these people with situational expertise that we want to really get out of the way of a lot of times in leadership. I'll tell a story and then I'll make it very practical, and we'll do a little more analogy here. So the story that the entire book is anchored around is the story of Roger. And Roger, when we meet Roger, he's a 17-year-old boy. And he's the kind of kid who grew up on the water. He grew up on the coast. His family had a very modest, cottage in Maine, and they'd spend summers there. So much so that Roger didn't save up for his first car. He saved up for his first boat. Now, I am from Nebraska. I cannot imagine saving up for your first boat, but this is Roger's life. And he had what I can only say is the Michaela's version of my first car. He had that kind of boat, which was not the one that we wanted out for a long time. And one Saturday, he went out with two of his buddies off the coast. Beautiful Saturday. They were exploring. They were having fun. They were doing all the things that 17-year-old boys do. And then all of a sudden, a very dense blanket of fog rolled in. So much so that Roger literally could not see his hand in front of him. Now, I've got two kids. All I can think about is the mom in this story. I'm like, this is like three 17-year-olds out on the ocean in the fog. They've been out half the day. How much gas do they have? How are they going to get home? And if you're to exactly the story you just told, the thing that we're hoping Roger has in his pocket is a compass. The thing that Roger left at home that day was his compass. So the only thing that he has are his two buddies and his surroundings. And we asked Roger, what were your instincts in that moment? He's like, all I wanted to do was put the boat in high gear and hustle it home. Of course, he wanted to do that. But that would not have been helpful. He literally had no direction, no idea which direction he was going. So instead, he did something that feels very counterintuitive. He stopped the boat and then he completely cut the engine off so that it was silent. And what he was doing was he was listening. Now, I have since learned that there is an entirely alternative set of navigational skills in coastal communities. I've told this story in coastal communities and everybody raises their hand. I'm like, who knows this? And everybody raises their hand. And there's all of these, they're called foghorns and bellbuoys. And they all have very distinct sounds based on where they're located. So what Roger was doing was he was quite literally listening for the sounds of home. And if he could hear the sounds of his home harbor, he could make his way there. Now, I still get goosebumps when I tell the story, and you talk about an internal compass. And so I'm like, the first question in my mind is, what constitutes our own sounds of home? I literally think about my grandmother's voice. I think about the rustle of leaves in the fall. I think about the rosary that was said in my church community. These very primal things that take me back to my sense of home. And so the thing was that Roger, he couldn't hear he couldn't hear his home harbor. And so first he was just listening for any sound, any home harbor. And he and his friends slowly made their way this way, stopping, cutting the engine, agreeing on which direction the sounds were coming from, and then moving their way incrementally forward. They made their whole way home like that. They made their whole way home without a physical compass because they worked together. They had an internal compass and they went bit by bit. Vocational wayfinding is a lot like that. These leadership moments are a lot like feeling lost out in the forest. And I've been here so many times before that even though I forgot my compass at home today, we can get very quiet together. We can pause, we can listen for the signals, and we can move just a little bit at a time. And I think that's the biggest advice, especially when I'm talking with younger people, is don't feel like you got to move the whole direction at once. Make a small choice today. Send an email, call one person, move toward another human being, something that feels very small and doable. So a lot more stopping and cutting the engine. And that looks different in different contexts. Sometimes it's okay. We created a little bit more space at the top of our meetings to just bring up the things that we're noticing as a leadership team, or to hear from people we don't normally hear from, or to calibrate what our organizational sounds of home are, and to help other people listen for those signals as well. I love that you're doing that with your daughter. The compass thing is very real. And I would say the goal here is for us to be able to do that work and learn the sounds of our home harbor, and putting that in air quotes, well enough that when we find ourselves in the fog, we trust that if we go little by little, we will make our way there eventually.
That's very hard for us to do, to
Yeah.
step back and to cut off the engine. Again, I think you talk about the fast pace that we're in, that the speed that we're in. The leaders have a hard time with cutting off the engine and stepping back. So I want to unpack this a little bit more, Michaela, because we're putting a few things together: the speed, the change that's happening, this idea of inner work that leaders need to do, vocational wayfinding that then causes us to listen to the sounds of home. So that's going to require a leader to be very self-aware and to have a sense of being present and grounded, which you talk about a lot in your book. So how might a leader be able to do that? How can they cultivate that sense of self-awareness in environments where there's just constant action and decision making they have to do in the midst of the environments that they're in?
Okay, I'm going to go all the way down to the very, very specific here, because I do think it's difficult to imagine when we haven't been doing this. There is a really precious and sacred space right after somebody asks something of us. They ask us to make a decision. An email comes in our inbox that someone feels charged, whatever they're doing, that feels like they're writing in all caps. Something we find out something's going on in the world, and this is the Roger moment. We just want to put the boat in high gear and go toward that. And actually, it's a really healthy instinct to want to go toward the problem. As leaders, we've been conditioned to solve problems. We've been rewarded for our ability to solve problems. The more complex they are and the more savvy we are, the better. But there's this really sacred space of potential for pause. And it starts with, once I get that email, once somebody asks me a question, can I count to 10 in my head before I respond? Can I take 3 big deep breaths? And what I have found, I'm speaking quite personally now, that my ability to count to 10 or take 3 big deep breaths actually leads to an ability to take 10 minutes, or to not respond to the email right away and loop back, and to move from reacting to responding. That move right there, like, reacting is that I fire off, I'm hitting the tennis ball back, it's going back and forth, I'm just going to hit this. Responding is saying, I'm not going to overstretch for that one. I'm going to let that one go. And I'm going to walk back, and I'm going to pick up the ball, and I'm going to serve again. And honestly, in meetings, in emails, those are, or Asana, whatever your project management software is, those are the places where this stuff happens the most. Can I lean back in my chair and take 3 breaths? Can I handle the silence in the room while I just gather myself before firing off? That is just the start of a whole new way of realizing, wow, The system may also reward me if I don't immediately solve all the problems. Or, goodness, I like how I responded to that email when I took an hour versus when I wrote back right away because whatever was going on in my mind that told me I had to write back right away. So I think this stuff happens in the very, very sacred, very small space right after all that stimulus or input is thrown our way.
Mm, man, I'm loving all the nautical metaphors here. I want to continue to drill deep on this idea of turning off the engine because it all honestly is a callback to what you said earlier on this desire for systemic change. I think that we have to name the reality of like turning off our engine in a world of kind of social media comparison might not be enough if we're still surrounded by jet skis and boats that are going 1,000 miles an hour all around us. That may not get us the clarity that we desire. It's not just about an individual boat because we're part of a much larger body of water, maybe even in our industry, that does need to be disrupted, but also we're really interconnected with at the same time. In our work, Michaela, with leaders, we really try to, like you mentioned earlier, not to bifurcate the two, but this idea of personal mission and kind of organizational mission. You need to have clarity around both, right? You need to turn off your engine personally to be able to get a sense of, as a leader of faith, where is God calling me uniquely? And how does that translate into the way I lead, this sense of personal mission? But many of our leaders are not leading that faith is shared across their teams. Rarely, if ever, our leaders are leading Christian companies where there's like a Christian screening of sharing faith, or even if there are a team of Christians, we all know there's the capital C church has enough variety to say we're not going to be in alignment on everything. Back to this idea of you being in the coordinator booth of what you're seeing between the relationship of personal purpose and mission and how that dovetails into organizational mission and how you see those two paths kind of converging and staying separate in the evolution of leadership.
It's a great question. I think I'll share one thing, and this is like an elephant, right? I think that this goes back to that inner life of a leader. One of the big things noticing today is, are those things aligned? Is organization and personal mission aligned? And also just naming that even these questions, these are the privileged questions of leadership. Not everybody gets to ask, is my personal mission aligned with my work? And at the same time, with the kind of power and resources that leaders steward, we have to ask these questions. We can't not ask these questions. So it's great. I'm the executive director of the Max Dupree Center for Leadership. Max wrote a lot of leadership books in the 80s and 90s that continue to really have formed generations of leaders. And one of his most famous quotes is, the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. And the last is to say thank you. And in between, the leader is supposed to be a servant and a debtor to the mission and the organization. Paraphrasing a little bit there. And I think as Christians who find ourselves in all kinds of organizations in which we feel some kind of personal alignment with, it's really easy to go all in on what I've just said, that quote. And it's really good work. And I think that from it, I hear a lot of leaders asking versions of what is needed from me? What does my organization need from me? What do my people need from me? What does God need from me? And that's a healthy question, but it's just a recipe for exhaustion without another question thrown in there. And that is, what does God want for me here? What do I want for myself here? That's a big shift. And when there's an absence of that question going on, there's the place for the alignment to get out of sync between a person and an organization, and for leaders to find themselves overextended even. And giving to the mission is a good thing, but overextended toward the mission actually hurts the mission in the long run. And oh, by the way, hurts yourself and your family relationships and everything else that you care about. This piece is the piece that really feels big to me here. The metaphor that Lisa and I use in the book is staying in your headlights. Lisa, I asked Lisa, like, how have you seen this play out over your 30 years of coaching leaders? She's like, I've never seen a major leadership crisis that didn't stem from a leader getting outside their headlights. I'm like, that feels like a lot. It's easy to get outside of our headlights because we're asking what is needed from us instead of what is really for us in this circumstance. And another way to frame that question is the common way, and Lisa and I have all these common versus uncommon postures in the book. The common question that we ask is, what should I do? What should I do here? And the uncommon is, okay, who am I and who am I not? And therefore, what is mine to do in this moment? How am I going to respond to this crisis? What does it look like for me to align in this moment with my faith values and how I'm wired as a human? So those shifts feel like they're at the heart of those alignment questions. And I would just say, for those of us who are believers, especially when we find ourselves in spaces that are not built on the fabric of Christian faith or where that doesn't all mean the same thing, we as individuals also matter in that system. And God wants good things for us. And paying attention to that is good and important work.
I love how you're calling out the right questions for us to ask ourselves as leaders. It may not be easy to get to those answers, but it starts with asking the right questions that, again, take a little bit more intuition and the ability to step back. Okay, we love to give our listeners a bottom line at the end of our conversations, which is a final thought or some next steps that can be something we can take with us. You talk a lot about just embracing the unknown. It's this idea of let's embrace the fog that's right in front of us and not try to make it go away. How do we live into it? So for those of us who may be hesitant to embrace the uncertainty, what are specific steps that can serve as a bottom line for today's episode that can give us a pathway forward?
That's a great question. To be a citizen of the modern world is to live in fog at some point and to go in and out of it. So the bottom line for me in all of this, if I could pick one thing, it's don't go it alone. Lisa and I have an image that we drew in the book that's built off of this boating metaphor, this Roger at sea. And by the way, Roger is Lisa's husband, which is why we get to know so much about him. And the question that is at the core of this is, who is in your boat with you? Who is the trusted crew? And I'll meet some people and they're like, I don't know. I think I got these people. And the trusted crew is the people who love you no matter what. They do not care about your success and failures. They're with you in it. They're rooting for you. They're going to get into the muck, but their admiration and their love and their wanting to be around you is not based on how awesome of a leader you are. And we need those people. And then I have sometimes people say, I don't know if so, gosh, I don't know if they're in that or if they're in your next layer, which is the collaborative. And so the bottom line is, if you've got some people in your life that kind of feel like maybe they're in your trusted crew, they're in the boat, or they're that next layer out, which we call the collaborative group, and you wish they were in the group that is just a little more intimate or vulnerable, lean into those relationships, cultivate some more vulnerability and sharing there. Because when you next time find yourself in the fog, maybe those people will be in your boat now. And it feels really critical to have the people that we need in our boat. So that's the bottom line for me.
Love it.
Wow.
This has been so encouraging, Michaela. Yeah. Just lots of nuggets for us to take, lots of good sound bites and analogies, pictures for us to take from the themes and the ideas that you presented today. Just really helpful to me and to, I'm sure, everyone who's listening.
Yeah, I'm never going to get on a boat again the same way, right? These are some sticky metaphors. So, and I'm not upset about it. This is great. Kayla, real quick, before we let you go, how can people get a copy of your book and point them towards the next step? If they're like, I want more of this, how can I go get the full version?
Yeah, of course. Thanks. It's been a real pleasure to be here. And thank you so much for the work that you guys are doing with leaders. It really matters to have people who've got the headsets on. Depre.org, DEPRE.org. You can see Life in Flux, and my other book, all the stuff we're doing at Depre Center. It'll link you out to an Enneagram and Change piece that Lisa and I wrote that's free. Just all kinds of things to get into at Depre, DEPRE.org.
Awesome. Michaela, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela.
To learn more about 1110 Leadership, visit our website at 1110leadership.com. That's the numerals 11, then spelled out TEN leadership.com. That's 11 TEN leadership.com. There you'll find more resources to equip you on the journey of becoming an 1110 leader. You can also get connected to our growing leadership network. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend. To help others find us, you can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.